This video is suitable for non-technical people checking out Bubble for the first time. It will give you a comprehensive framework to decide if Bubble is for your project. It's also designed for professional IT people who are evaluating Bubble by typical IT criteria, like how it supports the software development lifecycle, how it meets non-functional requirements. Whether you are technical or not, this video will help you to make an informed decision. Alright, let's get started. This is our complete, honest, and accurate review of Bubble.io in October 2025. Bubble has been around for over a decade now, and in that time it has become one of the most popular platforms for building software without code. It started primarily as a web application builder, and more recently it has expanded into the world of native mobile apps as well. That's a big deal because it moves Bubble from being a niche web-only solution into something much broader. A tool that can now serve founders, businesses, and creators who want to reach both web and mobile audiences without ever touching traditional programming languages. Now, Bubble sits in the category of what we call no-code app builders. And what that means is that instead of writing code line by line, you're using visual interfaces to design your app's pages, structure your database, and define the workflows that give it functionality. So in theory, someone without a computer science background can build fully functioning software. They don't need to learn JavaScript or Python or React or SQL. They can drag and drop, configure, and publish. And that's the promise. And when you hear that, it sounds amazing. It sounds like magic, really. Because for decades, building software has been a gated skill set. You had to spend years learning to code, or you had to hire developers, often at high cost and with long timelines. No-code tools like Bubble disrupt that by lowering the barrier to entry. But, and this is important, the no-code space has exploded. In 2025, there are dozens of no-code and low-code tools, and on top of that, we now have vibe coding, which is where AI generates large portions of code for you. So, the decision is no longer simply, should I use Bubble or should I use code? It's now a much more complex landscape, with tools like Webflow, Softr, Flutterflow, Glide, Xano, Retool, and various AI-assisted platforms competing for your attention. That makes the choice overwhelming. Bubble is also joining in the vibe coding space. Its first iteration is a prompt to the initial app generator, which can be used as a starting point for your project. This tool has already been very helpful for new Bubble users to quickly understand the power of the Bubble platform and how it could be useful for their project. However, the real power of AI in Bubble will arrive once the AI can make iterative changes. E.g., you can prompt Bubble to not only generate the app, but to keep building the app through prompting. I've just seen a post that Bubble has released this next iteration on their European tour in September 2025. So watch this space to see whether Bubble's product team will build something that helps it keep up with vibe code tools or even overtake them. And if you've been researching Bubble online, you've probably noticed the extremes. On one side, you have people who say Bubble is incredible, that it will solve all your problems and you'll never need a developer again. On the other side, you have critics who say Bubble is slow, limited, and a dead end. The reality, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. And here's where context matters. The right way to evaluate Bubble is not in the abstract, but against your own use case. What do you want to build? What stage are you at? What resources do you have? What are your long-term goals? Those are the questions that matter. My name is Will Ericksson from Momentum Group. I've been working with Bubble for over 5 years now. I've trained hundreds of students through Momentum Academy. I've spoken with at least 200 founders, business leaders, and potential clients about their app ideas. And I've kept detailed notes on whether Bubble made sense for each case. I've seen it work brilliantly. I've seen it be the wrong tool. And I've learned a lot about how to make the right call. So what I want to share with you here is the framework I wish I had when I first discovered Bubble back in 2020. Back then, I was in a startup accelerator. I was working with government systems, and I was deeply frustrated at the bureaucracy of code-heavy projects. Bubble looked like a way out, but what I didn't have was a comprehensive guide to evaluate it properly. I had to stumble through hype, through criticism, and figure it out by trial and error. That's why I'm making this video, to give you the review and the roadmap I wish I'd had back then. So what exactly is Bubble? Bubble is what I would call a vertically integrated full stack development platform. And that's important language because it separates Bubble from many other tools in the space. Let me unpack what that means. There are three core components Bubble gives you in one package. The first is a cloud-based visual development environment. This is the interface where you build your app. You can design the user interface, define your database, and set up your workflows. It's collaborative, so multiple team members can work on it. And it's cloud-based, so you don't need to install complex software on your computer. Everything happens in the browser. The second is hosting. When you build in Bubble, your app is hosted on Amazon Web Services. That means you don't need to set up servers, worry about uptime, or manage deployment pipelines. Hosting is taken care of for you. Your job is to build the app. Bubble's job is to run it reliably. And the third is a proprietary visual programming language. This is what allows you to define logic in a drag and drop way. Instead of writing if/then statements in code, you use Bubble's workflow editor to achieve the same outcomes. It's a different paradigm, but it's powerful once you get used to it. Now, Bubble has evolved a lot since I first started using it. In the early years, it was mainly about building web apps. But over time, they've added a responsive engine for modern design, a version control system so teams can collaborate, and enterprise-grade features like SOC2 compliance for security-conscious clients. And the biggest milestone recently has been the ability to publish simple native mobile apps directly to the Apple App Store and Google Play. That closes a gap that critics use to point out constantly, the idea that Bubble was just for web apps. Bubble has released its native mobile app builder into public beta in mid-2025. This is a very exciting moment for Bubble as it offers a true full-stack web and mobile app builder, which is unique in the market. What this means is that you can build an app that shares a single backend, but has web and mobile interfaces without needed separate development teams. Again, this release is quite new, and so I can't go into this in detail, but suffice to say that for use cases that include a mobile app component, Bubble is now looking more attractive as a choice of tool. I will caution and say that while the native app builder allows you to access a lot of aspects of mobile devices, e.g., camera, there are still limitations and features in development, so check the documents to assess whether you can achieve what you would like with the current beta version. For example, features such as writing data locally to the device and syncing back with the server have some limitations that may or may not impact your project. But a really important concept to understand about Bubble is vertical integration. Here's what that means. Normally, when you're building an app with traditional code or even with many no-code tools, you're dealing with multiple layers. You have your front end, which might be in React, your back end maybe in Node.js or Ruby on Rails, your database maybe Postgres, authentication through something like Auth0, hosting on AWS or Google Cloud, and then you have to wire all of those together, keep them talking to each other, and make sure it's secure. That's a lot of moving parts. With Bubble, all of that is integrated in one environment. You don't have to connect separate services. You don't have to configure authentication across systems. You don't have to worry about securing APIs between front-end and back-end. It's all one system. That vertical integration is what makes Bubble so fast to build with. To give you a simple example, let's say you want to display products in your app. In Bubble, you create a new data type called product, add fields like name, description, and image, go into the database editor and add a row of data, then place a repeating group on your page and set the data source to do a search for products. In 5 minutes, you have a live page displaying data from your database. Now compare that to doing the same thing in code. You'd design your database schema in Postgres, you'd write your backend in Node.js to connect to that database, you'd build your front end in React to fetch and display that data, you'd set up authentication and security, you'd configure your API endpoints, you'd deploy your app on AWS, and then you'd debug all of that until it worked. That's hours or days of work condensed into minutes. That's the power of vertical integration. And because of that, Bubble is extremely well suited to use cases where both the front end and back end can live inside Bubble. When that's the case, you can often build an app in 20% of the time it would take in code. And that time saving is not theoretical. I've seen it again and again in real projects. But here's the catch. Bubble is not built for every kind of app. It is not a data analytics platform. It is not designed for workloads where you're crunching millions of rows or running heavy aggregations in real time. It's not the right choice for apps that are fundamentally about large-scale data processing. Bubble is transactional. It's optimized for applications where users are reading and writing single rows or small sets of rows, and interacting with the database in ways that feel immediate. Marketplaces, SaaS tools, booking systems, dashboards, CRMs, communities, that's Bubble's sweet spot. So the very first step in evaluating Bubble is to be clear on your requirements. Don't start by saying Bubble is amazing or Bubble is terrible. Start by writing down what your app needs to do. List out the features, then compare those features against what Bubble does well and what it doesn't. That's the only way to make an informed decision. Now that we've unpacked what Bubble actually is and how vertical integration works, let's move on to one of the most important dynamics of the platform: flexibility versus learning curve. Bubble is, without exaggeration, one of the most flexible no-code tools on the market. You can design almost any user interface you can imagine. You can create workflows that mimic almost any logic. You can build marketplaces, SaaS products, dashboards, booking platforms, job boards, directories, CRMs, communities, learning platforms. The list is long. If you've ever looked at an app and thought, could I build something like that in Bubble? The answer is often yes. But here's the flip side. With flexibility comes responsibility, and with freedom comes risk, because Bubble doesn't give you the same guardrails that many simpler tools do. You are free to build beautiful, user-friendly, well-architected apps. But you're also free to build messy, confusing, unmaintainable apps. I've seen both. One of the big differences between Bubble and other no-code tools like Softr or Glide is that those tools are opinionated. They make decisions for you. For example, Softr is excellent at spinning up internal tools quickly because it gives you templates and standard layouts. You don't get total freedom, but you also can't mess it up too badly. Bubble, on the other hand, is a blank canvas. That blank canvas is liberating, but it's also dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. This is where the disciplines of software development still matter. Product management, UX and UI design, software architecture, testing, and support. Those aren't magically made irrelevant by no code. In fact, in Bubble, they matter more. Because without them, you risk building an app that technically works, but is confusing to use, slow to load, or impossible to maintain. I'll give you an example. We had a client who came to us with an app they'd built themselves in Bubble. They were proud of it and they'd clearly put in hundreds of hours. But when we opened it up, we found that their database structure was inconsistent, workflows were duplicated, and the UI was cluttered. It worked, but it was fragile. Any change risked breaking multiple parts of the system. We had to spend weeks untangling it and rebuilding parts to make it maintainable. This wasn't because Bubble is bad, it was because the app had been built without proper architecture and product thinking. So here's the principle. Bubble is a powerful tool, but it works best when you or your team bring software development disciplines to the table. Even if you're a founder building solo, you need to think like a product manager, a UX designer, and a tester. You don't need a computer science degree, but you do need to approach it with rigor. This leads to one of the first questions I always ask when evaluating Bubble for a project. Should we build or should we buy? Because the truth is, with the explosion of SaaS products, many of the features businesses want are already solved by off-the-shelf tools. CRM systems, learning platforms, content management systems, email marketing, project management, you name it, there are SaaS products out there that do it well. So the question is, do you actually need to build this custom, or can you buy it off the shelf? We worked recently with a not-for-profit here in Australia. They came to us with a long list of requirements. They wanted a new website with SEO, a CRM to manage donors, appointment booking, email marketing, a sales pipeline, an online community, online course hosting, and more. If we had tried to build all of that in Bubble, it would have taken months and carried significant project risk. Instead, we documented their requirements carefully and then evaluated tools. What we found was that Wix could handle most of their needs out of the box. Wix gave them a website with SEO, a CRM, email marketing, appointment booking, sales pipelines, a community, courses, and more. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And it was far cheaper and faster than building custom in Bubble. We also decided that financial systems needed to sit outside Wix for compliance reasons, but the point is, Wix was the right answer, not Bubble. That's a lesson many founders need to hear. Just because you can build something in Bubble doesn't mean you should. If there's an off-the-shelf tool that meets 80 or 90% of your requirements, you're often better off buying it and saving yourself the cost and risk of building custom. But I've also seen the opposite. I had a client who had built their system years ago in PHP. It was clunky, slow to update, and expensive to maintain. Every change took weeks. When they moved to Bubble, they found they could make changes in hours. They could respond to customer feedback quickly, run experiments, and iterate. For them, Bubble wasn't just a tool, it was a competitive advantage. So again, it's not about whether Bubble is good or bad, it's about whether it makes sense for your requirements compared to buying off-the-shelf software or compared to coding. Now let's talk about the learning curve. One of the myths about Bubble is that it's easy. And it's true that it's easier than learning to code from scratch, but easy is relative. To get a prototype up and running, you can probably do it in a few weeks. To get to the point where you can build a production-ready MVP, you're looking at around 200 hours of serious use. And to get to a professional level where you can sit the Bubble certification exam, you're looking at closer to 400 hours. I know this because I was on the official Bubble certification committee in 2024. I helped design the exam, and I've seen firsthand how deep it goes. The exam isn't about theory, it's about whether you've actually built and deployed real apps in Bubble, whether you understand workflows deeply, whether you can handle edge cases, and whether you can build maintainable systems. Very few people have passed it. That's why Bubble certification is a genuine credibility indicator. At Momentum Academy, we've built a bootcamp program specifically to help people learn Bubble properly. We teach it from first principles alongside product development concepts like requirements gathering, UX design, and testing. Because we've seen too many people dive into Bubble, build something messy, and then get stuck. It's not enough to know which buttons to click. You need to understand the software development lifecycle. Here's another client example. We worked with a founder who had an idea for a marketplace. They were non-technical, but they were determined to build it themselves in Bubble. They spent 6 months working nights and weekends, and they built something that worked. But when they launched, they discovered that their onboarding flow confused users, their database queries were slow, and their UI was inconsistent. They had built a product, but it wasn't usable at scale. We came in and helped them redesign the onboarding, restructure the database, and clean up the UI. Within weeks, their app was performing better and their users were happier. But the key lesson was that knowing how to make something work in Bubble is not the same as knowing how to make it good. That's why I always emphasize, plan for the learning curve. If you're a founder learning Bubble yourself, expect to spend hundreds of hours. If you're hiring developers, vet them carefully. Ask about their experience, ask to see live apps they've built, ask if they've passed the Bubble certification, because just like in traditional coding, there are great developers and there are poor ones, and the difference matters. Finally, let's talk about out-of-the-box features versus customization. One of the great things about Bubble is that it has a wide range of features available out of the box. User authentication, database management, workflows, responsive design, version control, all of that is built in. On top of that, Bubble has a mature plugin marketplace where you can add functionality like payments, maps, analytics, and integrations. But here's the catch. The more your app relies on plugins or custom code, the more complex your project becomes. Plugins are powerful, but they can be a source of risk if they're poorly maintained. And if you need to write your own custom plugins, you're back in coding territory anyway. So one of the questions I always ask is, how much of your project can be built using Bubble's out-of-the-box features? If the answer is most of it, then Bubble is a strong candidate. If the answer is not much, then you need to think carefully. I'll give you an example. We had a client who wanted to build a scheduling system with very complex rules, far beyond what Bubble's built-in scheduling could handle. We had to use a combination of plugins and custom code to make it work. It was possible, but it added cost and risk. If their requirements had been simpler, Bubble alone would have been perfect. So the principle is this. The more your project fits within Bubble's native capabilities, the better a fit Bubble will be. The more you need to go beyond that, the more you should question whether it's the right tool. So far, we've talked about what Bubble is, how vertical integration works, the balance of flexibility versus learning curve, and the critical decision of build versus buy. Now, I want to move into the second major lens I use to evaluate Bubble, and this is one that most people overlook when they're starting out. It's what we call non-functional requirements. When most people think about building an app, they focus on functional requirements, the features. Things like, I need user logins, I need a marketplace listing, I need payments, I need messaging. Those are important, but they're only half the picture. Non-functional requirements are everything else that makes your app viable in the real world. They're the qualities that determine whether your app is maintainable, scalable, secure, affordable, and reliable over time. If functional requirements are about what your app does, non-functional requirements are about how your app behaves and grows. And evaluating Bubble against your non-functional requirements is just as important as evaluating it against your functional requirements. So let's break these down one by one. First, customization. How much customization do you actually need? Bubble is highly customizable. You can design almost any interface, create almost any workflow, and customize almost any part of your app. That's a strength. But customization takes time. If you don't actually need full customization, sometimes simpler tools are better. For example, if you need a straightforward internal dashboard for your team, Softr or Retool might get you there faster. They'll give you pre-built layouts, guardrails, and common features without you having to make every decision yourself. But if you need a unique workflow or a very specific user interface, that's where Bubble shines. So the question is, do you need the power and flexibility of Bubble, or are you better off with a simpler, more opinionated tool? The more customization you truly need, the stronger the case for Bubble. Second, scalability. Scalability is one of the most misunderstood topics in no-code. I hear this all the time. Bubble can't scale, but scale means different things to different people. Most apps don't need to support millions of users. Most apps don't need real-time, high-frequency interactions like Facebook or Slack. What most apps need is the ability to handle thousands of users with normal read/write patterns. And Bubble can absolutely do that. I've seen Bubble apps with tens of thousands of users running just fine. The key is to design your database properly, use efficient queries, and avoid unnecessary complexity. And even if you reach Bubble's limits, there are strategies to offload certain workloads to external services through APIs. Where Bubble does struggle is with extreme, high-intensity workloads. If your app requires constant real-time updates across millions of records, or if your users are interacting with the app 8 hours a day at enterprise scale, that's where Bubble becomes less efficient. In those cases, custom code with finely tuned performance might be the better choice. So the principle here is understand your actual scalability needs. Don't dismiss Bubble because it can't scale unless you're truly building at a level where scale is the central problem. For many startups, Bubble offers more than enough scalability to prove the concept, find product market fit, and grow significantly before you ever need to worry about migration. Third, security. Security is always a critical consideration, and understandably, many founders worry about whether a no-code platform like Bubble can be secure. The answer is yes. Bubble is secure by default, and it takes care of a lot for you. Your app is hosted on AWS, which is one of the most secure infrastructures in the world. Bubble manages encryption, authentication, and server security. For enterprise clients, Bubble offers SOC 2 compliance, which is a recognized industry standard for security. But here's the important nuance. Bubble can provide a secure foundation, but you're still responsible for how you configure your app. If you build sloppy workflows that expose sensitive data, that's not Bubble's fault. That is on you as the builder. Security in Bubble is about making sure your privacy rules are set up correctly, your workflows don't leak data, and your logic protects user information. So yes, Bubble is secure, but security is a shared responsibility. Bubble handles the infrastructure, you handle the application logic. Fourth, reliability. When you build in code, you often rely on frameworks and libraries that need to be updated. Over time, those updates can break your app, forcing you to rebuild or refactor parts of your system. I've seen teams spend hundreds of hours just keeping up with framework changes. With Bubble, that problem goes away. Bubble maintains the platform, updates it, and keeps it running. You don't have to worry about upgrading from React 17 to React 18, or dealing with deprecated APIs. That's a huge time and cost saver. That said, you are dependent on Bubble's uptime. If Bubble goes down, your app goes down. In practice, Bubble's uptime is strong, and for most businesses, it's more than sufficient. But it's worth being aware of the trade-off. You're outsourcing infrastructure management to Bubble, which is usually a benefit, but it does mean you're trusting them to keep the lights on. Fifth, maintainability. One of the biggest advantages of Bubble is how easy it is to make changes after launch. In traditional code, making changes can be slow, especially if the original developers are no longer available. In Bubble, you can go into the editor, make updates, and deploy them quickly. That makes iteration much faster, which is critical after you launch your MVP and start responding to user feedback. I had a client who moved from a PHP system to Bubble, and the single thing they rave about is the speed of changes. What used to take weeks now takes hours. That ability to iterate quickly is a huge competitive advantage. Sixth, cost. This is always a big consideration. Bubble's pricing has changed over time, but in 2025, the standard plans range from around $29 a month at the low end to $349 a month at the high end, with enterprise plans starting in the thousands. Yes, that's more than raw AWS hosting, but the real cost comparison isn't between Bubble and AWS, it's between Bubble and traditional development. If you build in code, you'll spend far more on development hours, and you'll spend ongoing time and money on maintenance. For the right use cases, the time savings in Bubble easily outweigh the higher platform costs. And here's something that makes Bubble unique. There are no per user costs. SaaS platforms often charge per user, which means your costs rise as your user base grows. Bubble doesn't do that. You pay based on your app's workload, not the number of users. That makes it much more economical for apps with large user bases, but relatively light usage per user. Of course, costs can rise if your app has heavy usage. If thousands of users are hitting the database constantly, your workload units go up and your costs go up with them. That's where you need to evaluate carefully whether Bubble is still the best choice. But for many apps, especially those with occasional interactions like a monthly form submission, Bubble is extremely cost effective. Seventh, developer availability. This is an important practical consideration. If you're building your app yourself, you need to think about the learning curve. If you're hiring, you need to know whether you can find skilled developers. The good news is that the Bubble ecosystem has grown significantly. There are now thousands of Bubble developers around the world, from solo freelancers to micro agencies like ours to larger firms. But the reality is that there's still an undersupply of truly skilled Bubble developers. Hiring offshore developers can be cheaper, sometimes 5 times cheaper than onshore, but it often requires more management, more oversight, and more iterations to get the same result. Many founders find that the savings are offset by the extra time and effort required. Onshore developers cost more, but the communication and efficiency can save you in the long run. So the principle is this: consider the cost versus the management overhead. Don't just look at the hourly rate, look at the total cost of getting a working, maintainable app. Eighth, time to build and iterate. For startups, this is often the deciding factor. Time to market is critical. If you can launch faster, you can test faster, learn faster, and pivot faster. That can be the difference between success and failure. One of our clients moved from a custom PHP framework to Bubble, and they will tell you without hesitation that the speed of iteration is what sold them. They can now respond to customer feedback in days instead of months. That agility is priceless in a startup context. Ninth, testing and deployment. Bubble has a built-in concept of test and live versions. You can make changes in your test environment, and when you're ready, you deploy them to live. That separation is incredibly valuable. It means you can test new features without breaking your live app. Not every project needs this, but when you do, it's a game changer. 10th, version control and collaboration. Bubble's version control system has improved a lot in recent years. It's not as sophisticated as Git, but it's good enough for most teams. You can roll back changes, manage versions, and collaborate with multiple editors. For small to medium teams, it works well. And because you don't need a big dev team on a Bubble project, it is good enough for most use cases. 11th, hosting location. This is often overlooked, but it's critical if your app handles personally identifiable information. Bubble's standard hosting is in the US on AWS's US West region. For many apps, that's fine, but some industries and regions have strict compliance requirements that mandate onshore hosting. For those cases, Bubble's enterprise plan allows hosting in other AWS regions around the world. The catch is that moving to enterprise comes with a significant cost increase, often 10 to 30 times higher. That's something you need to factor in early if your app will handle sensitive data and you're operating in a jurisdiction with strict data residency laws. One of the main criticisms of Bubble from experienced software developers and entrepreneurs is vendor lock-in. Simply, this means you can't export the code and deploy the app on your own server. I agree that there are some downsides to this, and for me, the main issue is not that I want to cancel my Bubble subscription and host elsewhere, or even that I want to get cheaper hosting. It is more that I want to have control over elements of my overall stack and data processing to meet enterprise use cases like healthcare or financial services. This being said, Bubble's vendor lock-in can also be seen as a strength again because of the concept of vertical integration. Bubble makes managing the whole lifecycle of an app many times easier and takes a lot of the maintenance headaches away, which is why, despite vendor lock-in, Bubble is actually a better option for many projects. You have to evaluate vendor lock-in not from the perspective of a purist IT technician, but by looking at your use case for Bubble like a business or IT leader. Does it represent value for money? What is the total cost of ownership, including the additional time and skills needed to manage your hosting and cloud environment makes sense? Bubble versus a no-code builder with code export functionality. My argument in many cases is that Bubble wins on this count, and therefore vendor lock-in could actually be seen as an advantage. So to sum up this section, non-functional requirements matter just as much as functional ones. Bubble is strong on maintainability, iteration speed, and integration. It's secure by default, cost-effective for many use cases, and powerful in terms of customization. But it's less suited to extreme scalability, heavy analytics, or situations where compliance requires onshore hosting and enterprise budgets aren't available. The smart move is to map out your non-functional requirements alongside your functional requirements and evaluate Bubble against both. That's how you avoid nasty surprises down the line. Now let's step back and look at the big picture, the decision of buy versus build versus code. This is one of the most important decisions you'll make as a founder or as a business leader, because it's not just about whether Bubble is a good tool in general, it's about whether Bubble is the right tool for your specific situation. So let's break it down. First, buy. In many cases, the smartest thing you can do is simply buy software that already exists. If you need a CRM, there are dozens of good options. If you need a website, use Webflow or Wix. If you need a learning management system, there are platforms like Teachable and Thinkific. If you need email marketing, use MailChimp or HubSpot. Buying has several advantages. It's fast because the software is already built. It's reliable because those platforms are tested by thousands of users. And it's low risk because you can usually get started on a monthly subscription without a large upfront investment. The downside is that you're limited to what the platform offers. If you need custom workflows or unique user experiences, you may hit a wall. You can sometimes extend SaaS platforms with plugins or integrations, but you'll never get the same level of control you have with a custom build. So the rule of thumb is this: if your requirements are standard, buy. If there's a SaaS platform that does 80 or 90% of what you need and you can live without the last 10 or 20%, buying is usually the best choice. Second, build with Bubble. Bubble is the right choice when you need more customization than SaaS can offer, but you don't want the cost, time, and complexity of coding from scratch. For example, let's say you want to build a marketplace where buyers and sellers interact in a way that isn't supported by off-the-shelf platforms, or you want a booking system with unique rules and custom workflows, or you want a SaaS product with a very specific user interface and data model. Those are situations where Bubble shines. The advantage of Bubble is that you get full stack customization without having to build every piece yourself. You can design your database, your UI, and your workflows all in one environment, and you can do it far faster than in code. You also get the benefit of Bubble handling hosting, deployment, and infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about those layers. The downside is that you're still tied to Bubble's ecosystem. If you need to go far beyond Bubble's native capabilities, you may find yourself relying heavily on plugins or custom code. And if your app grows to the point where you need extreme scalability, you may eventually outgrow Bubble and need to migrate. But for many startups and businesses, Bubble gives you a huge head start. You can get to market quickly, test your idea, and build traction without spending hundreds of thousands on custom development. And for many businesses, Bubble is a good fit for their use case, and it is the only platform they will ever need. Third, code. Coding from scratch is the right choice when you need absolute control. If your app has extreme scalability requirements, if you need to host data in a specific region, if you need Git-level version control for a large team of developers, or if you're building a highly complex product with deep features that will evolve over many years, coding is the way to go. The advantage of code is unlimited flexibility. You can build anything you want exactly the way you want it. You control the stack, the architecture, the hosting, and the deployment. The downside is time and cost. Development is slower, more expensive, and requires more ongoing maintenance. So the decision is not bubble or nothing. It's buy, build, or code. And the right answer depends on your requirements. Let's look at some specific examples. When should you buy? If you're setting up a marketing website, buy. Webflow, Wix, or Squarespace will get you live faster and cheaper than building in Bubble. If you're setting up a CRM, buy. Salesforce, HubSpot, or Zoho will do more than you need, and they've already solved all the edge cases. If you're hosting courses, buy. Teachable or Thinkific will cover 90% of your needs out of the box. When should you build with Bubble? If you need a marketplace that doesn't fit existing templates, build in Bubble. If you need a SaaS tool with a custom data model, build in Bubble. If you need a booking system with unique rules, build in Bubble. If you need a social network with specific onboarding flows, build in Bubble. When should you code? If you're building the next Facebook, code. If you're building the next Salesforce, code. If you're building a system with millions of users engaging with the app for hours each day, code. If you need complete control over hosting, compliance, and architecture, code. Now let's compare Bubble to some of the alternative tools in the no-code and low-code space. Webflow. Webflow is an amazing tool for building marketing websites. It gives you pixel-perfect design control, great SEO features, and the ability to build responsive, modern websites without code. But Webflow is not a full-stack app builder. It's not designed for complex logic or databases. You can extend it with integrations, but if you want to build a real web application, Webflow is not enough. That's where Bubble comes in. Softr is fantastic for quickly building internal tools or simple apps. It's built on top of Airtable, which makes it easy to get started. But Softr is limited in flexibility. You're constrained to what the platform offers, and you can't customize workflows deeply. It's great for MVPs and internal dashboards, but if you need full control, Bubble is the better choice. Flutterflow. Flutterflow is a low-code tool for building mobile apps. It's closer to traditional development than Bubble, and it gives you the ability to export your code. That's powerful if you want the option to transition to full code later. But Flutterflow requires more technical skill. It's not as accessible for non-technical founders, and it doesn't give you the same vertical integration as Bubble. You'll still need to handle your backend separately. Xano. Xano is a no-code backend platform. It's fantastic for building APIs and handling data logic, but it's only the backend. You'll need to pair it with a front-end tool like Webflow or Flutterflow. That gives you flexibility, but it also adds complexity. Bubble, by contrast, gives you front-end and back-end in one platform. Vibe coding. Vibe coding is the newest trend. It's where AI generates large portions of your code for you, often using natural language prompts. Tools like GPT can write entire functions or even generate front-end components. And that's exciting and it's powerful, but vibe coding still requires you to manage infrastructure, hosting, deployment, and code quality. The AI can write code, but you're responsible for stitching it all together and making sure it works. That means vibe coding is closer to traditional development in terms of overhead. It's a great option for technical teams, but for non-technical founders, Bubble is often the easier path. So where does Bubble fit in this landscape? Bubble's edge is vertical integration. It gives you front-end, back-end, and hosting in one platform. It eliminates the need to stitch multiple tools together, and it gives you the ability to build complex apps without writing code. That makes it unique. Now let's talk about the types of apps that work best on Bubble. Two-sided marketplaces, platforms where buyers and sellers interact like Airbnb or Upwork. Booking and reservation platforms, systems where users can book appointments, reserve spaces, or schedule services. SaaS products, custom tools built for a specific niche or workflow. Dashboards and reporting tools, apps that display data in a clear, user-friendly way. Social networks and community platforms, spaces where users can connect, share, and interact. Learning platforms, systems for hosting courses, managing content, and engaging learners. Membership sites, platforms where users pay for access to content or features. CRMS and sales pipelines, custom systems for managing customers and deals. Internal business tools, custom workflows for managing operations, inventory, or processes. Personal finance tools, invoicing systems, project management apps. niche vertical tools for industries like health, legal, or education. These are all strong fits for Bubble because they involve transactions, user interactions, and workflows, exactly what Bubble is optimized for. Where is Bubble not a good fit? Apps that require heavy analytics, real-time data crunching, or machine learning at scale. Apps that need extreme performance for millions of concurrent users. Apps that require onshore hosting without the budget for enterprise plans. Apps that will eventually need a deep multi-layered feature set developed over a decade with dozens of developers. Think Salesforce, Google Docs, or Jira. For those use cases, traditional code is still the better choice. But for a huge range of use cases, especially for startups, small businesses, and niche SaaS products, Bubble is an incredible option. It lets you build fast, iterate quickly, and focus on your users instead of your infrastructure. One of the things I want to make really clear before we close is that your decision about whether to use Bubble doesn't have to be permanent. It's not an all or nothing choice. A lot of founders fall into the trap of thinking, if I start with Bubble, I'm stuck with it forever, or if I don't start with code now, I'll regret it later. That's not how this works. In reality, many teams use a hybrid strategy. They start with Bubble to move quickly and then migrate certain components to code later if and when they need to. Think about it this way. The hardest part of building a startup or launching a new product is not scaling to millions of users. The hardest part is proving that anyone wants your product in the first place. That's where Bubble shines. It lets you go from idea to live product in a fraction of the time, test it with real users, and prove whether the market exists. If you succeed, then yes, maybe 3 years down the track, you'll decide to rebuild certain parts in code for scale or flexibility. But by that point, you'll have revenue, users, and investors, which means you'll have the resources to do it. If you fail, you've failed quickly and cheaply, and you haven't wasted years building an over-engineered system that nobody wanted. So don't think of Bubble as locking you in. Think of it as giving you a head start. I've seen this hybrid approach play out in real life. One client built their MVP entirely in Bubble, launched, and grew their user base over 2 years. Once they reached tens of thousands of active users, they realized that certain parts of their system, specifically the analytics engine, needed more performance than Bubble could offer. So they kept most of the app in Bubble, but they migrated the analytics to a custom-coded microservice. The two systems talk to each other via API, and the users never noticed the difference. Over time, they gradually shifted more components to code, but they always credited Bubble with giving them the speed to launch and survive those first 2 years. That's the power of a hybrid strategy. Now let's talk about long-term considerations. One of the big ones is maintainability. As I mentioned earlier, Bubble makes iteration easy. That's one of its strongest advantages. But you still need to think about how your app will be maintained over time. Who will make changes? How will you document your workflows? How will you onboard new developers if you bring them in? I always advise teams to treat their Bubble app with the same discipline they would treat a coded app. Document your data model, create naming conventions for your workflows, keep your UI consistent, test your changes before deploying them. These practices don't go away in no code, they just take a slightly different form. Another long-term consideration is your team's skill set. If you're a solo founder, learning Bubble yourself is a great way to get started, but as you grow, you'll probably need help. That might mean hiring a Bubble developer, working with a micro agency like ours, or training your internal team. The good news is that the Bubble talent pool is growing. The challenge is that there's still a gap between hobbyists and professionals, so you need to vet carefully. A third consideration is cost. Bubble's pricing works really well at the MVP and early growth stages, but you need to model out how it will look if you succeed. How many users will you have? How often will they interact with your app? How much workload will that generate? If you know those numbers, you can forecast your Bubble costs and decide whether they're sustainable. One more consideration, investor perception. Some investors are skeptical of no code. They worry about scalability, IP ownership, or vendor lock-in. Others don't care as long as you're getting traction. If you're planning to raise capital, be prepared to explain why Bubble is the right choice for your stage and how you'll handle migration later if needed. I've coached founders through those conversations, and the key is to frame Bubble as a speed advantage, not a permanent decision. So where does all of this leave us in October 2025? Here's my honest view. Bubble is one of the most powerful, mature, and versatile no-code platforms in the world. It's not perfect, it's not right for every project, but for the right use cases, it delivers extraordinary value. If your functional requirements align with Bubble's strengths, things like transactions, workflows, and user interactions. If your non-functional requirements are a good fit, things like scalability at the level you need, security within Bubble's framework, cost within your budget, and maintainability for your team. If you or your team have the product skills to design, build, and manage the lifecycle of software. And if there aren't off-the-shelf SaaS products that already solve your problem more cheaply, then Bubble is an amazing choice. It will save you time, it will save you money, and most importantly, it will get your product into the hands of users faster than almost anything else. But Bubble is not a magic wand. It will not save you from poor product thinking. It will not guarantee success. It is a tool, and like any tool, it needs to be used wisely. So my advice is this: don't ask, is Bubble good or bad? Ask, is Bubble right for my project, at my stage, with my goals? That's the question that matters. If you want help answering that question, that's what we do at Momentum Group. We've built apps, we've trained developers, and we've guided hundreds of people through this decision. If you're serious about exploring Bubble, reach out to us at momentumgroup.tech. We can help you evaluate your use case, design your product, and build it if Bubble is the right fit. And if you want to learn Bubble yourself, check out Momentum Academy. We've trained complete beginners, experienced product managers, and technical professionals. We teach Bubble from first principles alongside the product development process. So you don't just learn how to click buttons, you learn how to build real, usable, maintainable apps. So that's my complete, honest, and accurate review of Bubble.io in October 2025. Bubble is not hype, and it's not a dead end. It's a tool that, in the right hands and in the right context, can unlock opportunities that would have been impossible just a few years ago. And for many founders, it's the difference between staying stuck with an idea and bringing that idea to life. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, subscribe for more deep dives into no-code and product development. And if you have questions, drop them in the comments. I'll do my best to respond.